Have you ever met a Lebanese person who introduced themselves as Phoenician? Not as a metaphor or a fun fact, but as a deeply held conviction about who they are and what separates them from the Arab world. This identity didn't emerge from nowhere. It is a constructed identity forged out of a desire to reclaim an ancient civilization, to give Lebanon its own story, separate from Islam and Arabia, rooted instead in the DNA of the Mediterranean. At the heart of this idea stands one figure, Charles Corm. This is how one man's vision reshaped the Christian Lebanese identity, and why, decades later, you can still meet people who will tell you, with full conviction, we are not Arab, we are Phoenician. On the 1st of September 1920, French General Henri Gouraud declared the creation of Greater Lebanon, Grand Liban. It was the first time a Lebanese state existed with clearly defined borders, stretching from Nahr el-Kebir in the north to the gates of Palestine in the south. But this was not simply a political announcement. It was the culmination of decades of lobbying and nationalist dreaming, mostly by one community, the Maronite Christians. Gouraud's speech was carefully loaded with symbolism. He spoke of the triremes of Phoenicia sailing the Mediterranean, connecting modern Lebanon to an ancient civilization. Lebanese historian Youssef Chouairi observed that Gouraud wasn't just drawing borders. He was recreating the past, fusing history with geography. Every word was a signal to the Maronites. France sees you, France knows your history, and France is here to confirm it. To understand why, we need to understand that the bond between the French and the Maronites was exceptionally strong. Both sides trace this friendship back to the Crusades of the 11th century, all the way to the 17th century, when France positioned itself as the protector of Catholic communities across the Ottoman Empire. By World War I, the Maronite elite had one goal, an independent Christian state, with France as its guarantor. In 1920, they got it. But the dream didn't begin in 1920. It began in 1841, when Maronite Bishop Nicolas Murad published La Notice historique sur l'origine de la nation maronite, calling for a Christian political entity in Mount Lebanon. He wrote it in French and addressed it to the French king, Louis-Philippe I. Murad's book is widely considered the first expression of what historians call the Lebanist idea, the belief that Mount Lebanon's people were a distinct nation, deserving their own state. By the early 20th century, the engine of Lebanese nationalist thought was not a political party. It was a university. The Université Saint-Joseph, run by French Jesuits in Beirut, became the intellectual hub of the Maronite elite. Unlike French colonial schools elsewhere, the Jesuits actively researched and taught the history of the region, because France considered Lebanon part of its own heritage. Students learned about ancient Phoenicia, Syriac Christianity, and the Crusades, graduating convinced they were heirs to a civilization far older and grander than the Arab world around them. The finest product of this Jesuit world was Charles Corm. Born in Beirut in 1894, he graduated from St. Joseph with honors in 1911. French was his language. He didn't even speak Arabic. Europe was his cultural reference, shaped by the Flemish thinker Henry Lamens. He became the Ford Motor Company's sole agent in Syria and Lebanon before abandoning business entirely to, in his own words, dedicate himself to his patrie through speech and writing. Corm lived two lives, the successful businessman and the nationalist poet. It is the second life that history remembers. In July 1919, he launched La Revue Phénicienne, calling openly for Greater Lebanon as a separate non-Arab entity. Unapologetically Francophile and anti-Arab, it only ran for 4 issues, but established Corm as, in the words of the French press, the well-known Lebanese patriot. In 1934, he published his masterpiece, La Montagne Inspirée. The title was borrowed from Maurice Barré, the French radical right nationalist who wrote La Colline Inspirée. Barré believed nations derive their energy from sacred soil, from ancestors buried in it, the cult of the soil and the dead. Corm transplanted this onto Lebanon. Just as Barré's hill in Lorraine embodied the soul of France, Corm's mountain embodied the soul of Lebanon. He dedicated the first section to Barré, praising him as someone who knew how to understand us because he loved us. At the heart of La Montagne Inspirée is a mourning cry for the lost Phoenician language. Corm wandered poetically through 3 sacred landscapes, the Khadicha Valley, stronghold of Maronite monasticism, the Adonis River, where ancient Phoenicians made pilgrimages to their gods, and the temples of Baalbek, the virile heart of Lebanon's ancient soul. His message, before Lebanon was Christian or Muslim, it was Phoenician, and in that shared pagan past, all Lebanese could find unity. Yet Islam, Arabic, and the Arabs were essentially absent from the poem. The images, the theology, the history, all of it was Christian. This is the central tension in Corm's nationalism. He addressed his Muslim compatriots as brothers, writing famously, "My Muslim brother, I am the real Lebanon." But his framework positioned Christian Lebanon as the authentic heir of Phoenicia, and therefore of Western civilization. The Arab world was implicitly excluded. Phoenicianism, despite its language of unity, was in practice a way of saying, "We are not Arab." Corm's political vision failed. The 1943 National Pact defined Lebanon as having an Arab face, but the cultural seed kept growing. The poet Said Aql took Phoenicianism further, arguing colloquial Lebanese was entirely separate from Arabic and should be written in a modified Phoenician alphabet, spreading Corm's ideas by translating them for the masses. Today, traces of Corm's Lebanon are everywhere in how Maronites speak of their mountains, their 5,000-year history, their Phoenician alphabet. The idea outlived the man, who is barely remembered today. Most people who call themselves Phoenician have never read a single line of his poetry, and that, perhaps, is the most powerful thing a nationalist poet can hope for.